Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the second installment of the Quran series. We are back with Sheikh Fad. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you?
How are you, Sheikh? For
I'm
the
good,
second time.
alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. How is lockdown? Are we progressing? Are we
No, man, probably
stalling?
here in the States, probably regressing
It's not that.
would
It's
be
in the
the
States
word.
here as well. We're
Subhanallah.
regressing as well since Saturday,
Oh,
as
man.
far as pubs and clubs are concerned. But yeah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
But I hope you're safe and everything's good, yeah, overall,
Yeah,
otherwise.
alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah.
So far,
So
so
Sheikh,
good.
why don't you give us a bit of a summary as to what you covered last time? And
Okay, all
then
right.
let's
Well,
start with today's.
so let me just, okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulil kareem amma ba'd. So our focus last time was actually on the philosophy of language. And we went into, I think, a lot of detail. Believe it or not, I actually had more in my notes that I was looking at for those of you who were here last time. But anyway, so we went into a lot of detail related to the philosophy of language, the starting of language, and how that relates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching Adam alayhi salam the asma, kull shay, right? The names of everything and what that meant. And we started to dabble into its connection with knowledge. So what we're going to be doing today, inshallah, is we're going to be digging deeper into the very concept of knowledge. We're going to be looking at epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, and the different categories of knowledge, etc. And we're going to be doing it from the framework of the story of Adam alayhi salam. And then we'll also be starting with some of the elements that I'll be covering in the next session, which is the construct of the human being. Meaning we are definitely people of intellect. I mean, we are beings of intellect, but we are also spiritual beings. So we want to highlight that. I'll touch upon that today, but next time is where we really dig into that and we start looking at the process by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the ruh versus the process by which he creates the body, etc. And there's some very interesting aspects that we're gonna get into. But so today we're just gonna be focusing on knowledge and looking at that, and we're looking at some interesting elements of the Quran itself, right? So so that's pretty much where we're inshallah going to be going. Let's go ahead. Let's recap the actual story itself, right? So if you want to bring up Surah Baqarah where we had started last time, and I think it was
Give me a second. Let me just bring it up for you now.
right. So it was وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ. All right. So and mention when your Lord said to the angels. I'll read the English very quickly, just because I want people to kind of, if they weren't here last time, to be with us in the story, right? So so and when your Lord said to the angels, indeed, I will make upon the earth a successive authority. The Khalifa here is what's being referred to. They said, will you place upon it one who causes corruption therein and sheds blood, while we declare your praise and sanctify you? Allah said, indeed, I know that which you do not know. And he taught Adam the names, all of them. He showed them to the angels and said, inform me of the names of these if you are truthful. They said, exalted are you. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. Indeed, you are the knowing and the wise. So then he says to Adam, inform them of their names. And when he had informed them of their names, he said, did I not tell you? I know the unseen aspects of the heavens and the earth, and I know what you reveal and what you concealed. All right. So, and then, and this is where we're going to actually start. وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. So and mention when we said to the angels, prostrate to Iblis, prostrate to Adam, and they prostrated except for Iblis, right? Wakana, Aba wastakbara wa kana minal kafirin, and he refused, and he was he had kibr, he was arrogant, and he became one of the disbelievers. Actually, let me continue on with the story just so we have a completeness here. All right, and we said, "O Adam, dwell you and your wife in paradise. Eat therefrom in ease and abundance wherever you will, but do not approach this tree, lest you be among the wrongdoers." But Satan caused them to slip out of it, removed them from that condition in which they had been. And we said, go down all of you as enemies of one another, and you will have upon the earth a place of settlement and provision for a time. And then Adam received from his Lord some words, and he accepted his repentance. Indeed, he is the accepting, repentance, and merciful. All right. And we're going to cap the story here on this last ayah, which is, and we said, قُلْنَا اهبطوا منها جميعا. So go down from it, all of you. فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُم مِّنِّي هُدًى. And when guidance comes to you from me, وَمَنِ اتَّبَعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. So when guidance comes to you from me, whoever follows my guidance, there will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve. Okay. So one of the things that we know when it comes to this very story, and I went through it a bit quick, I would advise you to, read it on your own if I went through it a bit quickly, is that the story of Adam alayhi salam is found in many places in the Quran. So for instance, you find in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-A'raf, Surah Al-A'raf, Surah Al-Hijr, Surah Al-Isra, Surah Taha, Surah Sad. There's mentions in Surah Al-Kahf, and so on and so forth. And one of the places that you mention, what you find is that you mention the story is mentioned, but sometimes the wording is different. And this may cause people a little bit of, let's say, I don't want to say doubt, but some sort of like ishkal, some sort of like, okay, this is a bit difficult. Like, why is it like this in one case where Allah mentions it here, and it's like that in another case where Allah mentions it somewhere else? Okay, so I wanted to give an example of that, and that was the last ayah we mentioned. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ نَهْبِطُوا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. So if you see it, it says, we said, go down from it, all of you. Notice it says, قُلْنَا اهْبِطُوا, which is the go down, مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا, from it, all of you. Now, if you compare that to the ayah in Surah Al-Hijr, which is 123.
Give me a second, Sheikh. Let me bring it up on the screen.
I'll give you a second.
So we can see it as well, inshallah. Okay, so there is.
Okay, perfect. I don't suppose you do them side by side, huh?
No, it doesn't give me that.
It's cool. It's cool, inshallah.
Which particular ayah are we looking at? Number?
So we're looking at 123.
So okay, so 123.
Oh, you're doing the scrolling thing. Oh man.
Yeah.
Okay, inshallah. All right.
20. Actually, I could have done the other way, to be honest. My bad.
It's all good, man. It's all good. Alhamdulillah.
Did you say 123? Surah Hijr?
Yeah. So 20. So it's Surah 20, verse 123. Was that?
Oh, so Baqarah still.
No. It's not Baqarah. Surah number 20, verse number 1. So do 20.
Okay, sorry. I'm
123.
I'm in the wrong place. Sorry.
It's all good. That might have been my mistake.
20. 23.
Sorry, that wasn't Surah Hijr. That was Surah Taha. My bad.
Yep. No problem. I've got all three open now, so it's all good.
All right.
You might as well start, Sheikh. I'll get down to it. It's just not letting me get to the other way.
All right. So you find in Surah Taha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning the same thing, says, قَالَ اهْبِطَا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. All right. So now, what's the difference? So in the first, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, قُلْنَا اهْبِطُوا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. Here in Surah Taha, Allah says, قَالَ اهْبِطَا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. Okay. So as you may or may not know, within Arabic, you not only have words that are you don't just have a singular and a plural, but you also have a dual, right? So in English, we have singulars and plurals. You can say man and you can say men, right? And that's it. To say two men, you actually have to add the word two, T-W-O, and say two men. In Arabic, you can morph the word to signify two. So we have the singular, the plural, and the dual.
Yep.
Okay. In this ayah that's speaking about the same thing, right? Because it's when you look at the ayat surrounding it, it's talking about Adam alayhi salam and what Allah is saying to Adam alayhi salam. In the first instance, it says, قُلْنَا أَهْبِطُوا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. Go down from you, and the plural is used here. أَهْبِطُوا, right? And you see that with the ta and the wow after it, okay? In Surah Taha, it says, قَالَ أَهْبِطَا.
Yep.
Right? Two of you go down from here. All right. Why? So before I tell you why, let's have Imran take a guess.
Okay. So while I'm trying to guess, guys, if you're watching this and you heard the point, let's get your thoughts on it as well as to why you think that's the case. that in this particular ayah in Taha, it says it's in the jewel, and in Baqarah it's in the plural.
Yeah.
So
Because someone could come and say,
yeah,
like some Orientalist or something might come and say, well, look, there's a clear contradiction,
yeah,
right? In
yeah.
one case, the Quran is speaking in terms of a plural, and here it's a dual. So
Yeah.
clearly there's a contradiction here. I mean, that's what they
so
mean.
this over here it's specifying. So both of them, I assume it's referring to Adam and his wife,
Okay.
right?
All
And
right.
in Baqarah, I assume, well, it's referring to both of them again, but maybe an additional someone or something.
So who's the additional someone and something?
So
According to your knowledge of the story, who else was there?
I'm assuming Shaitan.
Of course, Shaitan.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
But then the puzzle is, well, why doesn't that it specify it here in this particular ayah? That why doesn't Allah say in plural again here, right?
Right. Okay. So yeah, that is the puzzle. All right. So here's the thing. When we look at Surah Taha, one of the things that we'll notice is that the term is qala, right? He said.
Mhm.
Now, in terms of English, is that first person, second person, or third person?
Third person.
Third person. Wonderful. Okay. Now, in the first, in the case of Surah Baqarah, it says qulna. We said. First person, second person, third person.
It's first person.
First person. Okay. And by the way, qulna, we said. For those who might not know, it's the royal we, not the we of plurality. And so you find this in languages like Arabic, like Urdu, right? So when you if someone of honor comes into the room, they may walk in and say hum aage hai, right? Like we have come, right? Not that you have 5 guys that just entered the room, but just as a way of giving honor. And I think even English used to have this. Like when the queen would come into a certain room or something, you said, we have now entered, right? Just to signify that she was royalty. So anyhow, so qulna, we, and we said, go down from it, all of you. All right. So the thing is, in the first case, Allah is quoting exactly what he said. Qulna ahbitu minha jami'an. Go down, all of you. How many people is he speaking to? Or rather, how many beings is he speaking to?
3.
Speaking to 3, right?
Yeah.
Adam, Hawa, Shaitan. In the second case, we see it's third person, where Allah is saying, he said, talking about what Allah said, Qala ahbita minha jami'an. So he then said, talking third person, go down, both of you, from there. Now, why is it talking about 2? Here it's not talking about what exactly Allah said, right? To distinguish the 3 people, the 3 beings that were there, but rather it's giving you the information. We're talking about 2 categories of people: ins, shaitan.
Okay.
So when it says, because why? Because it's addressing human beings and giving you the story from a third person perspective, right? So therefore, in this case, when it says ehbita, right, go down, both of you, meaning 2 categories of beings. Humans, jinns. In other words, human beings, shaitan. Because Adam and Hawa are in one category and shaitan is another category. He's amongst the jinn, right? So what we see here is that within the subtlety of switching from first person to third person, in the first case, what's being quoted is exactly what's being said. In the second case, we're being given information about the situation and to clarify that there is a joining of different types of, let's say, groups, right? So you have ins, you have the human beings, and you have the jinn, and that's why 2 of them are mentioned. Okay. Now, the other the other thing to note is we looked at these 2 verses, but remember we said that the story is mentioned in a number of different places. Right? So we said Surah Al-Hijr, Surah Taha, Surah Baqarah, Surah Al-Kahf, and so on and so forth. Right?
Yep.
Now, one of the things that I find really phenomenal about the Quran, and I'm not sure if this exists in other scriptures. Maybe we'd have to get Sheikh Adnan on one day and see if this actually exists. But the concept of a text not only giving you information, I shouldn't say text, not a scripture, not only giving you information, but also giving you an interpretive methodology. Okay? Because any sort of field of study that you have, any sort of field of knowledge that a person has, it's not only the source of knowledge, that's one element, okay? It is also the recipient of the knowledge, but it's also the method, meaning different fields will have different methods, right? So when we think about empirical sciences, the physical sciences, even between physical sciences, different sciences have different methods, right? So the methods that you can use in, let's say, chemistry, right, where you can combine certain chemicals and see what the reaction is, you can't use that same method in, let's say, astronomy, right? You can't say, okay, let's do some experimentation. If we take the moon and move it over here, let's see what happens, right? It's two different methods.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to understanding revelation, what I find really phenomenal is that the Quran not only gives you the revelation itself, but gives us the method by which to understand revelation. Okay? And what I was mentioning was that I'm not really sure if this exists in something like the Bible. Okay, and this is again something we may need to touch base with Sheikh Adnan about and see if this is the case. But from what my reading of the Bible has, what I've observed, is that depending on your worldview, you can give an interpretation of the verses in the Bible, right? So if you come from a Trinitarian worldview and you read a certain verse, you will read the verse as you want from your worldview, right? If you come from a Tawheed worldview, you'll read it with a Tawheed worldview, right? An Islamic worldview. And then there's the debates between, okay, well, which one is the correct interpretation? When in essence, it's two separate worldviews, right? So it becomes sometimes very difficult to come to an agreement that this particular biblical verse means this, right?
Yep.
And I think a lot of that has to do with a lack of methodology to interpret the Bible, right? Any sort of exegetical method to understand what is in the Bible. The Quran is different like this because when we go through the Quran, we find that Allah not only gives us the words of the Quran and what they mean and so on and so forth, but also an interpretive methodology, right? A methodology in how to understand the Quran. So one of the elements of that methodology is that, for instance, we say that you do the tafsir of the Quran, ayat of the Quran, with other ayat of the Quran, right? Yufassiru ba'dahu ba'da, right? Where does that come from? By the way, let me ask you, if I ask, like, okay, so we know that we're going to take, like, this is within usulu tafsir, the principles of tafsir, the principles of exegesis. Why do we say that you are going to do an explanation of some ayat explain other ayat? Why is that important? Like, if I asked you just off the top of your head.
Top of my head, well, I would assume because, like you said, the same stories are mentioned many times in different parts of the Quran, and it gives a different dimension to them or a different perspective to them.
Okay.
And it's only when you see them collectively together do you get a full picture of what's going on. So I guess that's one of the reasons you would take that approach, right? Which is you see it almost not organically lead you, when you read the Quran, it almost organically leads you to that type of understanding of how you should understand the Quran, right? Which is holistically and in relation to each other.
Okay, wonderful. So from a, let's say, common sense, organic, natural point of view, that makes sense. Like, if you're going to have the entire story and you take it from bits and pieces within the Quran, when you put it together, it should all make sense. Fair enough. Okay. But what I was mentioning is that even that as a method, is that found in the Quran? Like that particular method that you just mentioned, that is, let's say, quote unquote, common sense, right? Because remember, if human beings, like, common sense isn't really all that common sometimes, right? But does the Quran itself give us a means, but to say, okay, well, this is why we should use this as a method? So, okay, let me ask you this. Does the Quran have contradictions?
No.
Okay, how do we know that from the Quran itself?
Because Allah says, if this was from anyone other than Allah, you would have found many contradictions in it.
It is like the what do you call it? The hallmark of the da'iyah to know that ayah inside out, right?
Hopefully, hopefully.
So basically, we know this ayah, especially if you're in the realm of da'wah, you know this ayah, right? أَفَلَا تَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. لو كان من عند غير الله لوجدوا فيه اختلافا كثيرا. Right? Do they not ponder upon the Quran? Had it been from any other than Allah, they would have found in it many contradictions. So not only is this an ayah speaking about the idea of there being no contradictions, and if there were, that it'd be from other than Allah, but it's also giving us a glimpse into an asal, a rule from the principles of tafsir. How so? Because the idea is that if you have an interpretation of one verse, right, and you have another verse that's talking about the same thing, not only is it that, okay, they're different, but the interpretation of one should not contradict the interpretation of another. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So
right?
So let me say that again, just so I get it, and I can clarify this. What you're saying is, because this foundational principle is laid out by Allah Himself, that there is no contradictions in His word. Then when you have a same part of or say two ayat which speak about the same historical event or occurrence, and there seem to be on the surface, on a sort of superficial reading, differences, you know that there is no differences or contradictions. So the case now is for you to understand them holistically together, in line with each other, because you know there's no contradictions. So it's just a case of
Okay, so kind of. So what I'm trying to say is that you're going to have verses, and then you have interpretations of the verses, right? Now, how are we going to tell which interpretation is correct? All right, so let me give an extreme example. Someone comes, like a Christian comes and says, look, your Quran has the Trinity in it. It says, Bismillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. 3, 1. Okay, so now they're like, all right, that's nice, but what are we going to say in response? You may say something like, okay, Qul huwallahu ahad. Say Allah is one and unique, right? Ilahukum ilahun wahid. Your ilah is one ilah, and so on. Now, you have one interpretation to say these three are three separate, distinct entities, and they are one, like the like someone who comes from Trinitarian Christianity would understand it. But then, does that understanding contradict the understanding of other verses in the Quran? You get what I'm saying? If it does, then between the two interpretations, you take the one where you reconcile the ayat together. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right? So between interpretations, you take the interpretations where the verse doesn't contradict the interpretation of another verse.
So what you're saying is the correct interpretation in such cases is the one that allows for the supposed contradiction to be removed, and for that synergy to take place, basically.
Exactly. Because if someone comes with this interpretation, they say, why is your interpretation better than my interpretation? Right? And so we say, well, hold on. The Quran says that there's no contradictions in it. So if your interpretation, if your interpretation is bringing a contradiction, then right away we know that it's an incorrect interpretation. Make sense? And this becomes very important because people are, when they approach the Quran, they approach the Quran in a way that says, like, well, that's your opinion, and that's his opinion, that's her opinion. It's like everyone has their own, like the truth is relative, right? It's just, well, every man on his own. But the reality is that Allah has given us a means by which to understand the Quran. Okay, so for instance, even when you look at the ayah that we're speaking about in Surah Taha, you see that kind of before that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا, that like this, we've sent it down as an Arabic Quran. So one of the other principles we understand, and we spoke about this a little bit last time, was that if you're going to interpret the Quran, one of the tools you need is the Arabic language. Not just the Arabic language as is spoken today, but the Arabic language of the 7th century. Right, of that time period, of that particular context. Okay, another, for instance, and this is also, so this is from the Quran. So this is one interpretive method. The second interpretive method we mentioned about no contradictions between verses. How about when you have verses that are clear and verses that are unclear? So for instance, you may have a certain verse and you're not really sure about what it means. And how are you supposed to then get the explanation of how it means? It goes back to the Quran, yufassiru ayat ba'duhum ba'da, that the ayat explain each other. The other evidence we get from that is from Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Imran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ مِنْهُ آيَاتٌ مُحْكَمَاتٌ هُنَّ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ وَأُخَرُ مُتَشَابِهَاتٌ. So it is he who has sent down, O Muhammad, the book. In it are verses that are precise. That's what the translation says. They are the Kitab, the foundation of the book. The others are, and the translation here says unspecific. The words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using is, number one, those ayat that are muhkam. Now, muhkam is like something being locked in place. Expressions that are, you can say, explicit. And those are the Kitab, the foundation of the book. That's what you're going to use to interpret those that are mutashabih. Now, what do we mean by mutashabih? Mutashabih comes from a trilateral root, shabaha, okay, which means things that are similar. So when people say, okay, unclear, I think a better translation of the term mutashabih are things that are consimilar, meaning they're so similar you can't tell one from the other. So, for instance, you remember the story of Musa alayhi salam and Bani Israel, and when Musa alayhi salam says, "Your Lord has ordered you to slaughter a cow," right? Inna Allaha ya'murukum an tadhbahu baqara. Now, what did Bani Israel do? Sami'na wa ta'na. Okay, we obey. Boom, we slaughter the cow. No, they start getting into question after question after question, and at a certain point, they say, "So call upon your Lord," right? So call upon your Lord, because all of these cows tashabaha alayna, right? They are so similar we can't tell them one from the other. So ask Allah which one we're supposed to slaughter, right? Which one we're supposed to slaughter. So what's the term? What's the root that's used there? Tashabaha, sheen ba ha. So you have things that are so similar you can't tell one from the other. Then you have ayat that are muhkam, that are locked in place. You use the ones that are muhkam to give you the correct understanding of those that are mutashabih. All right. Now let me just highlight what we mean by muhkam. Muhkam is something that's explicit. So imagine, Imran, you and I, we go. I don't know what's a good restaurant in London. Yo, don't say Nando's because I'll kill you.
Let's use Nando's.
Nando's sucks, man.
Let's use Nando's.
Oh my gosh!
You
right.
went there more than I think you wanted to.
That's true. Actually, I don't think I went with you to Nando's. It's just all the other crew took me there.
We did. I think we did.
All right. So you and I,
Nando's when you were here, SubhanAllah.
Let's say you and I drive to Nando's, and we get there, and the sign says closed. Now, if you turn to me and say, what do you think that means? I'm going to think you're nuts. I'm like, what do you mean? It says closed, right? It's an explicit statement that says closed. And therefore, there's no kind of, what do you think that means? And what is the interpretation? Because it's explicit, right? Now, there may be some instances in which the statement would not be explicit. So let's say you're looking at you're looking at Google Maps, and it's, I don't know, what's a typical, I guess, Christmas, right? The day before Christmas, and we're not really sure if it's open or not, especially in the COVID environment. So you look at your phone and you say, look, it says it's closed based on store hours. And I say, well, hold on, is that closed because it's Christmas Eve, or is it closed because of COVID? And you say, well, I'm not really sure. Now you have something that's mutashabih. Like, okay, so we don't really know because we don't have enough information. What is the thing that clarifies it is when you get there and you see the sign that says closed, that is the muhkam that's clarifying the mutashabih. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So when it comes to interpretive methodology, the Quran is giving us these methods by which to correctly understand the Quran itself. And I would advise people that if they haven't studied like a text on usul tafsir, to go through it, because it'll really illuminate a lot of the specific points we're talking about how the Quran gives a hermeneutic tool. It gives tools by which to understand how to correctly interpret the Quran itself. So that comes from the Quran itself, which is really fascinating to me. Anyhow,
two things, Sheikh, quickly. So, brothers and sisters, there's loads of questions, but we're going to leave the questions till the end. So just be patient with us. As soon as we come to the end of the session, I'll go through the questions, and if you want, you can repost them again at the end, and then we'll cover them, inshallah. Second thing, Sheikh Fahd, regarding on the two types of verses you're speaking about, I was just thinking about, because I think it's in Baqarah where Allah says, okay, so there's these two types of verses, and those that are, if you like, similar, like you've explained, which require a bit of understanding based on the the clear verses, the clear ayat, that no one, but Allah says that something along the lines of that only those that are firmly grounded in knowledge understand the meaning
فأما
of those
الذين
verses.
قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه. Right?
Yes, so firmly rooted in. So is it one way of understanding that, based on what you said, that the people that are firmly rooted are those that are firmly rooted in those verses which are.
So there's two interpretations. It's actually the surah. It was the ayah from Surah Al Imran, which is 7th ayah, right? Same ayah that I was just quoting, by the way, right? So هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكم إلى الآخر. So in that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه من. So, and as for those in whose hearts is a disease, they will follow that which is mutashabih, right? That they're not clear. They're so similar you can't tell one from the other. And then it says, and it's seeking discord from amongst them, and basically giving an interpretation suitable to them, the ta'wil. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. And nobody knows their interpretation except for Allah. Now, it depends on your recitation, where you're going to stop in the recitation. You could say nobody knows nobody knows the correct interpretation except for Allah, and stop there. And then the ayah continues, وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلُّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. Right? So if you stop there and only Allah knows the interpretation, that's one interpretation of the ayah itself, right? That only Allah, and there may be some things that are mutashabih, which only Allah knows the interpretation, which is true, right? So if you think about like the huruf al-muqatti'at, right? The ones that start off each surah or many surahs, those are things that, I mean, you could have so many different interpretations, but at the end, you have to leave it at Allah knows best. Okay? Now, if you read the ayah differently and you say, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ, right? That you include the people who are grounded in knowledge along with Allah, then you can say, okay, well, the people that are grounded in knowledge are going to know the interpretation of the ayah. But it goes back to being grounded in knowledge is being grounded in knowledge first and foremost of an interpretive methodology, right? To start off with. And therefore, understanding things like verses not contradicting each other and using the Quran to interpret the Quran, okay? So you can have both understandings, and both of them are kind of depending on where you stop in the recitation are allowed, and Allah knows best.
Okay, fair enough.
All right, so that was that. Now, coming back to what we were speaking about in terms of the plural and the dual. The ayah itself, and they're similar in this. If you remember the entire story, this is the concluding ayah. So you talk about Adam alayhi salam being taught the names, the angels being told to prostrate. They all prostrate except for Shaitan, except for Iblis. And then Iblis tempts Adam and Hawa, and then they're told to go down. And this is the point where you kind of it ends it off. So in Surah Al-Baqarah again, وَقُلْ نَحْبِطُوا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُمْ مِنِّي هُدًى, and go. So we said, go down from it, all of you. And when guidance comes to you from me, فَمَنِ اتَّبَعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Whoever follows that guidance that's coming from me, they will not have fear, they won't have any sort of fear. They won't have any sort of grief. All right, so let me stop here for a second. Typically, when we talk about human beings, what are the things, I'm kind of generalizing, what are the things that we fear typically in terms of timeline? Let's put it that way. Do we fear things in the past that are already done, or things that are in the future? What do you think, Imran?
We fear things that are in the future.
Yeah, in the future, right? Like what if... what if we don't get out of COVID? What if the schools never open? What if, like we were talking before, what if the bar doesn't open? It's like, oh my God, right? So you have this khawf, right? You have this fear, and typically it's related to the future. Okay. What about huzn? What about sadness? Typically it's things related to the past, right? Like, had I only done this, then I wouldn't be in this position. Had I only gone to college, I wouldn't, be working as whatever, or whatever it might be. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is highlighting here is that if you take the guidance that comes from me, meaning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happened in the past, you have a clear understanding that that is the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one of the benefits of believing in qadr, right? One of the 6 pillars of iman. But also that you understand that the future is also in the hands of Allah, right? So it's supposed to invoke within you someone that's taking that guidance from Allah, a sense of positivity. All right. However, the ayah is different when you come to Surah Taha, okay? Where Allah says, remember, we said there was a difference between the plural and the dual, but here Allah says, وَقَالَ أَهْبِطَا مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا بَعْضُكُمْ لِبَعْضٍ عَدُوٌّ. And so descend from here, all of you or 2 of you being enemies of one another, okay? فَإِمَّا يَتِيَنَّكُمْ مِنِّي هُدًى. So it's similar now. So whoever, and when there comes to you guidance from me, فَمَنِ اتَّبَعَ هُدَايَ, and whoever follows that guidance, now notice this is where it's different, فَلَا يَضِلُّ وَلَا يَشْقَى. That person will not go astray, and that person will not have, let's say, not suffer. Okay? So when we say la yadillu, we're talking about going astray, but what it's really highlighting is the idea of understanding clear thinking. Now, I think it's maybe our 8th session, or maybe 7th or 8th session, we're going to get into the concept of the effect of awe on human thinking, right? Like there are ways that you can think about things in terms of, you know, how you perceive things, where you can see things as they really are versus having, let's say, a number of biases. So as many of you might know, that human beings have a number of biases. There's, you know, a number of cognitive biases. You have, you know, biases related to being in a group. When you're at a restaurant and nobody orders dessert, you're the one that doesn't want to order dessert, even though you might want it, right? So those are the group biases. You have biases related to your ego and all sorts of these cognitive biases come in. What we're going to see in that session is that there's a lot of studies that have been done on the effect of awe, right? When you see something like a huge mountain range, or like you look at something like the sunset, that you see something that in its grandeur, it makes you feel small, right? That's what we mean by awe. It gives you the sense of kind of smallness in this grandeur and this greatness. So that very experience causes you to do away with biases, which means it gives you clear thinking, okay? And from our tradition, we know that those are ayat, right? And ayat have the function of giving us clear thinking, going towards the truth. So those ayat can be ayat kawniyah, in other words, ayat from the creation itself, or ayat Quraniyah, the ayat from the Quran. So one of the functions of the ayat is not just information, but in that, taking that information and applying it, it gives you clarity. It gives you a way towards the truth. So whoever takes that guidance, فَلَا يَضِلُّ, that person will not be astray, وَلَا يَشْقَى. And so therefore, you kind of able to do it with cognitive biases by way of that guidance, and you're also able to do away with the idea of a tough life. Okay. You remember, so when I was in the UK, I remember you did the presentation on what was it?
Life without God.
What's that?
Implications of atheism, I think it was.
Implications of, yes, exactly. Yeah. Do you remember the ayah you opened with? This was a long time ago, so I shouldn't really be testing you on this.
Was it where Ma'ishatan Danka?
Yes. Okay. Do you know where does that ayah occur? Do you know?
Subhanallah. It's gone out of my mind, man. Subhanallah.
Okay. So here you go. Ready for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, all right, in the ayah in Surah Taha, right? اهبطا منها جميعا بعضكم لبعض عدو, and whoever takes the guidance from me, he will not have فلا يضل ولا يشقى. And then the ayah right after that says, ومن أعرض عن ذكري فإن له معيشة ضنكا. Right? Whoever turns away from my remembrance, indeed he will have a depressed life. Okay? What's really interesting, just in terms of the phonetics of the Quran as well, is that when you recite this, ma'ishatan, the da is very heavy, right? The dad, donka. Even the acoustics of it signify this kind of difficult, heavy nature of this life.
Yep.
Okay. Now, when you take both of those ayat in that understanding, how do you do away with that heaviness and those difficulties of like existential realities and questions that we have? It's by following the guidance. Okay. It's just, I just thought that you might find that interesting, is that the ayah comes right after.
It literally jogged my memory when you said it, subhanAllah. So it's almost like, subhanAllah, it's almost like so what you're doing is you're linking it to the whole point about how going through an existential crisis in this world, when you're trying to find who you are and what's your purpose. And the answers to those questions, as we already know, can't come from yourself. They're going to come from the creator that made you. So here Allah is outlining that very reality in these ayat, where he's telling us, when revelation comes from me and you follow it, this will be your outcome. And if you don't follow it and you turn away, then that depressed, anxious life that you may suffer from, that will be your particular outcome. So your in other words, your emotional and your psychological, your spiritual state is contingent upon following or not following revelation from God.
Yeah. So one of the things that let me just mention here real quick. One of the theses that I'm presenting today, and this is where we're trying to get to, is that knowledge is in a vacuum is useless. You must couple spirituality with true knowledge in order for it to be beneficial. Right? So that's where we're actually going with this. When we get into categories of knowledge, we're going to see that, right?
What do you mean by combining spirituality with knowledge?
Meaning just trying to endeavor to learn things, let's say even about the world, if you are completely and spiritually disconnected, in the grand scheme of things, it has no value. Okay, and that we'll see, inshallah, if we have time, in the juxtaposition between Shaitan's position of arrogance and Adam's position of humility.
Sheikh, on that note, let me give you a bit of a time.
I just noticed. Okay.
We're at 41 minutes. So we've got literally about 25 minutes to go.
All right.
Just so we know where we are, inshallah.
All right. So let me do this. I'm trying to think whether I should cover or try to cover this or not. Okay. How about I'll let you guys decide amongst the two options which way you want to go, which one of these two paths you want to go down. Okay. One is related to the Quran and the idea when Allah says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. So we told the angels to prostrate before Adam, and they prostrated except for Iblis. Okay. So one of the tracks we can go down is, was Iblis an angel? Okay. So we'll talk about like that, or we can go straight to the categorization of knowledge. So which one would you would you like to get?
It's your choice. Just let us know in the comment section. I'm gonna check now.
We got to know quick though. So I know some people might be thinking, oh, okay, well, it's just about, the idea of the majority, and then you can have a minority within a majority, and you can.
Someone gave a third option. Better question: which Bible, King James Version or New Revised Standard? I don't know what links there, but.
Oh man.
Okay.
All right, let's do this. Let me try to cover it a bit quickly. Right? Because it ties in with categories of knowledge as well. Okay. So very quickly, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he uses language in the Quran, you can use a statement that is general and then that general applies to the minority as well. Okay. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this is because many Christians may come to this verse and come with, again, a Christian worldview, which says that, Satan was a fallen angel. And when you read this, you may say, okay, well, there you go. There's the evidence. He's a fallen angel. However, from a grammatical standpoint, that's not always the case, because you could speak about the majority and you could call a group of people by the majority, even if the minority is completely opposite of the majority. Okay, so I'll give you an example. In Surah An-Nisa, the very famous ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarifies whether Isa alayhi salam, whether Jesus was crucified or not. Okay. And so in the ayah 157, as for their saying, indeed, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to resemble them. And indeed, those who differ are in doubt about it. Now, we're not talking about the actual incident itself. The end of the ayah says, مَا لَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ عِلْمٍ إِلَّا اتَّبَعَ الظَّنَّ. So they have no knowledge of it except following doubt. Okay. Knowledge, doubt. Is doubt knowledge? Or is it the opposite of knowledge? Right?
Doubt's the
opposite of knowledge. Yeah. And so, however, so based on the way it's placed, وَمَا لَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ عِلْمٍ, that they don't have knowledge, right? They don't have knowledge except the following of doubt. اتَّبَعَ الظَّنَّ. Okay? But اتَّبَعَ الظَّنَّ, the following of doubt, is the exact opposite of knowledge. And yet, you would say that, okay, so knowledge is the general category, the overall category, and you have something that's opposite of it that's taken as the exception. Do you get what I'm saying? Okay, so this is very possible within the Arabic language. Okay, all right. Let me highlight one other thing. Ittaba'a dhan, the following of doubt. In a structure of thought, is it better to have a starting point in certainty, or better to have a starting point in doubt? Okay. Certainty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? However, in the modern world, do people usually start with certainty or doubt?
Doubt. No doubt you start with doubt. Absolutely.
Right. No doubt you start with doubt. Okay. The question then arises, and this is one of the things that's plagued philosophy for who knows how long, and it came to its apex, 19th, 20th century, and is still reaming some of the effects in the 21st century. The idea that you start from doubt, you ask for proof about everything. Can you prove it? Can you prove it? Is there a scientific proof? And so on. However, what I'm going to say is that the Islamic position is that you start with a position of certainty, and then you find, let's say, evidence or whatever it might be to take away that certainty. So certainty is your starting point, and doubt is then, what you. So let me give us a simple example. In a court of law, okay, you cannot start with a no position. Okay, meaning that when someone is on trial for something, you either are going to assume they're innocent or assume they're guilty. You cannot just be like, well, who knows? And then therefore that's, we'll see how the trial. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
In most legal systems, you have the assumption of innocence, and then you have to prove the guilt. Okay. And that's just something that we as human beings come about for the reason that you cannot start with a position of doubt, meaning we just don't know. Okay. Because doubt only breeds doubt. Okay. Let me dig down deeper into that. What do we mean by doubt? What we're saying is that we are going to question and ask why is a particular thing. All right. So if I doubt, let's say that it's daytime. All right. So I doubt that. So then I need to, okay, what is the proof it's daytime? I see the sun. All right. Now I'm going to doubt, is my interpretation of the sun being there correct? So can I prove that my eyes actually work and are giving me the correct information for me to interpret that sun is there? Okay, now you're going to, let's say you get to some way to be able to do that. If you cannot have a methodology of doubt to go back ad infinitum, right? There is no theorem that is infinitely defendable. You cannot ask why infinitely. You cannot say because this, because this, because this, because this forever, right? And the example that I always give, and you've probably heard it like a million times now, is that imagine my son comes to the kitchen, he takes out a knife. You remember this example, right? Takes out a knife, and I'm like, Abdurrahman, put the knife back. He's like, why? I'm like, well, because it's sharp, it'll cut you. He says, why? I'm like, well, because the manufacturers made it that way. He says, why? I said, well, because, you need it to like cut like meat and fruit and things like that. He said, why? I said, well, fruit, it's more, it's easier to eat when it's cut. Well, why? Well, because fruit, at a certain point, what am I going to say to him? He says, why? I'm going to say, because I said so, right? You cannot ask why infinitely. You cannot have a methodology of doubt and to have a starting point of doubt and just that be your method, okay? Because why? Because if you say why infinitely back, or you're trying to go, you have to come to a point where you doubt your doubt, which leaves you intellectually paralyzed, which is totally impractical. You can't do anything with that. So by necessity, your starting point has to be what's known as ilm qat'i, a point of certainty, right? And so what I usually tell people is that this point of certainty in philosophy, we call these basic beliefs, axiomatic truths, whatever it might be. That particular point of certainty that you know to be true, but you cannot prove it, because by the very definition of proving it, you've entered into the realm of doubt, which means you need another tool outside of that to prove that particular theorem. All right. So in other words, you have rationality itself, but you need something that is outside of rationality in order for rationality to work. Okay. So for instance, logical principles, the principle of mutual exclusivity. Like, I cannot be a married bachelor, right? Even in Islam, with the fact that we can have 4 wives, whatever it might be, I still can't be a married bachelor. Okay. Why? Well, because that's a logical problem, that there's mutual exclusivity. Being married means I'm not a bachelor. Being a bachelor means I'm not married. If someone says, prove the principle, you can't. You just have to say, we're going to start with the principle. So those elements that are outside of rationality, which we may call supra-rational, outside of rationality, they're not irrational. They're just outside of rationality, by which all of rationality works. Okay.
So you're saying baseline assumptions that we need to assume, axioms basically.
Axioms, basic beliefs
that have to be there, without which you can't build the house. That's the foundation.
And by definition, you can't prove them. You know, this whole thing about we'll prove it. But you can't. That's the very point. And you have to have something outside of rationality in order for rationality to work. Okay. So I'll give you just another example that I give all the time. Look, if someone says, I'm only going to use rationality, right? That's my only tool. It's like someone who says, I have the universal solvent. It can dissolve anything. You want to ask that person, what bottle will you keep it in? Right? Rationality is a great solvent, but you still need a bottle to keep it in, right? Solvent, absolute. You have to have something that is absolute, that which is insoluble. There's no proof for it. So rationality is a great solvent, but you still need to keep it in a bottle. Okay. All right. So when it comes to the Islamic position, and I would say just there's no other option except the Islamic position, is to start from a position of certainty. All right. How are we doing on time?
We're good. We have about 15 minutes.
Oh man, you want me to cram all this into like,
I
5 minutes?
I actually want you to give us a bit on the Adam alayhi salam and Shaitan's points you were going to discuss as well today.
Yeah, I've got that way in my notes. Okay. Ahead, inshallah. All right. So let's now let's come down to like this. Let's go back to the story itself, and let's understand a little bit about the categories of knowledge. Okay, so when we say knowledge, last time we spoke about the function of language and how that's tied to the idea of knowledge. When it came to the Adam alayhi salam, Allah teaching Adam alayhi salam the names of everything, that the position of the angels was, at the time, they thought they were the most knowledgeable and the most honorable. Okay, and if we had time to understand the concept of wahi, which I don't think we will, but you'll see why they thought that. Okay. But maybe we'll have to save that for next time. All right. So when it comes to categorization of knowledge, you have, for instance, Ibn Khaldun, who says knowledge can be categorized into two camps. Okay. You have what's known as ilmul abdan and ilmul adyan. So you have knowledge of the physical world or the physical bodies, and then you have knowledge of like religion or spiritual knowledge. Now, when you look at the story itself, the knowledge that is the asma, which is the names, is that knowledge of the bodies, knowledge of things, knowledge of the physical world, right? Physical realities that we have, right? Part of the human being itself. The knowledge, the ilm al-adyan, is that spiritual knowledge, right? Which was possessed by the angels, okay? Which at the conclusion of those ayat, as we just mentioned, is the guidance that comes from prophets and messengers. That's directly from Allah. Okay? So now you have these two ways in which we can think about two categorizations of how knowledge works. Now, the thing is, from an Islamic framework, the human being is a composite of kind of two essential pieces. You have a physical, animalistic base self, you can say. And then you have a spiritual reality, which is the ruh. Okay, now how these are intermingled, Allah knows best, right? When you look at the ayah related to the ruh, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. So they ask you concerning the ruh, concerning the spirit. Say that the spirit is from the amr, from the command of Allah. We'll get into this maybe next time. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And we've only given you a little bit of knowledge. Okay? Now, how are these things co-joined and so on and so forth? Allah knows best. But let me give you a quick kind of understanding of what we mean by the ruh. So you're familiar with Allama Iqbal, right? Muhammad Iqbal, the poet out of South Asia. So he has this this philosophy called the Khudi, right? And there's a very famous poem they wrote, Khudi to kar buland itna ki har taqdeer se pehle, etc., right? But so his philosophy, when someone asked about it, they thought that his philosophy would be coming from some other philosopher like Kant or somebody else from the Western world.
Yeah.
But he pointed out to that person that that philosophy, in fact, comes from an ayah of the Quran. Okay, the ayah is وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُم. Do not be like those who forgot Allah, forgot God, so that God caused them to forget themselves. So what do we mean by ourselves here? Because if you think about the quintessential people who forgot God, right, or don't care about God, whatever it might be, maybe you say like atheists, or let's say extreme agnostics, right? That's, again, a separate issue, but those are the people who say like don't want anything to do with God. And yet, do they forget to like dress in the morning? Do they forget to brush their teeth? Do they not get careers? Do they not go to school? Do they not want money? Do they not have families, etc.? They don't forget themselves. So what does it mean that Allah caused them to forget themselves? Because there is kind of what's being highlighted here is an ontological principle or an ontological reality. And that is that what is you as a being? So if God forbid, let's say now, Imran, you get into a car accident and you lose an arm, are you still you?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Let's say, God forbid, you lose your other arm. Are you still you?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's say, God forbid, you lose your legs. Are you still you?
Yes.
Okay. What makes you you?
Well, it's so the essence isn't your physical body. That's what we're getting at. Yeah.
Because you have to ask, where is that consciousness that we have when you're hearing me right now? Yeah, there's sound waves, there's brain function, but where is it? Is it in a particular cell? Like, how do you now? So from the Islamic tradition, we know that that's part of the ruah, the conscious reality. Your ontological being is part of your ruah, which is your reality. Okay, so you have a physical reality, which is your body, but then you have a conscious reality, which is your ruah. So when Allah says, do not be like those who forgot God, so God caused them to forget themselves, they're forgetting that they have a spiritual reality, right? That's what in essence makes Fahad, and what makes Imran, etc., right? Okay, now, related to that, if we look at the types of knowledge that we're talking about, you have knowledge that's related to your physical body, means like that you share with like animals, okay? Let me ask you this. Do animals have intelligence?
Well, you could say
where's Tabor, man? We need to get him in here.
It's probably a good idea. You could say they're intelligent to an extent. They are. They have intelligence. They can do things they need to do, and they can function.
Yeah, of course. In fact, I would go as far as to argue that they have a concept of truth. Meaning, if an animal knows that it can get food in a certain place, that's either true or false, right? Obviously, it doesn't think in these sophisticated philosophical terminology, right? But the point is, it has a general understanding of truth and falsehood. Meaning, if I go this direction, I'll get the food. If I don't, I won't. Okay, but that is based on an impetus, which is its desires. So human beings have this animal reality or this base animal state, which we have intelligence, like animals have intelligence, but our intelligence differs because it is at a much higher level. We're able to think abstract things and think about things like meaning and, and things like future and past. And like we mentioned last time, our language, the fact that we have that ability. So we have an animalistic reality, all right, which is driven by desire. Now, animals are completely blind when it comes to that desire, okay? Humans, however, have a spiritual reality, which is where you find moral realities. So, for instance, when a lion hunts down a gazelle, the gazelle doesn't stop and say, "Excuse me, please stop hunting me. I find this morally reprehensible."
Yeah.
Right? Because it doesn't. It's blind. It just has desires and it acts upon desires. Human beings, however, have a ruh, have a spirit, have a spiritual reality, which is where you find morals and things like that. Okay. These spiritual realities are connected with angels. And the spiritual reality, the ruh itself, is a type of like angelic creation, for lack of a better term. Okay. So the angels, when they now get, let's say, knowledge, and when a human being gets knowledge, we can categorize those as you have angelic knowledge and a type of animalistic knowledge. Okay. Animalistic knowledge, and like kind of a well-developed animal, which is the human being, is basically the thought process, discursive reasoning. We take in facts, we think about them, and so on and so forth. The asma that we're talking about. But what about knowledge that's going to support the ruh, right? Which the angels were privy to as well. That comes by way of wahi. Okay, that comes by way of revelation. Okay, so what do we mean by wahi?
Sheikh, on that, if I can ask you, would you say a sort of baseline element of that knowledge is embedded within every human being from the perspective of the fitrah as well?
Yeah.
So like for example, Allah says, where He's in Surah Shams, where He says, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا.
Yes.
So there's an element of, if you like, spiritual knowledge or guidance, what we're referring to as spiritual knowledge there, but it's not complete. It's completed with revelation from Allah when it comes.
Yes. So that's actually what I was going to speak about next. And actually the hours.
I was waiting because I know you're big on the fitrah. So I was like, when's the Shaykh going to mention when is he going to go into it, and when are we going to go into it? Because we're literally at the end of time now.
All right. But do you want to go ahead and conclude? Or do you want
to? To be honest, I think there's definitely two parts to this particular episode.
All right, fair enough.
Because I want you to go into the second thing you wanted to talk about as well, which was Adam and Shaitan, and that sort of dynamic that goes on where Allah tells the angels to prostrate and accept Iblis. He doesn't.
Right. So what? So the dichotomy we come up with is basically to say Shaitan hyper focused on that knowledge which is related to your animal basal self, right? Okay. And the wahi, right, that angelic knowledge, how angels get knowledge, we were going to get into that wahi, that revelatory knowledge is what Adam alayhi salam has that personality because he's a prophet, and prophets get wahi. And then what I was going to get into was the process of wahi, how there's secure wahi, which is in the privy of prophets and messengers only. And then there's wahi that all of us get as human beings, but it's not secure. It's not meaning that could be wahi in the sense of coming from your desires. It could be a wahi coming from Shaitan, but you do get it. And so I was going to give some examples of that as well. Like for instance, even within science, if you remember Kierkegaard in 1865 when he came up with the benzene, the dream he had of the benzene structure. Well, where does the dream come from? Right. So, anyways, but let's save that for next time, inshallah.
Inshallah, because there's loads of interesting ends that you've brought up in this session that I want you to tie in, and I'm going to ask you I don't know what your availability is next week, but I know we do this fortnightly. Maybe we can do an extra session next Tuesday.
Let me let you know.
Okay, let me know, inshallah.
Maybe we'll do that just to catch up.
I really want to know, and I'm sure everyone wants to know. Okay, we're talking about knowledge. We're talking about different types of knowledge, angelic knowledge, the type of animalistic knowledge. Now you've just spiced it up by mentioning that what you saw Shaitan demonstrating was the type of animalistic knowledge, and that's what he was heavy on and focus.
Right.
And Adam was doing the opposite.
Hyper focusing on empiricism.
And I want to know how this ties into the fitrah as well. like how it also all of these. Why don't you summarize what we discussed today? Because again, it was quite heavy and deep at certain points. So summarize it for us, Sheikh.
Okay.
And by then, if anyone has questions in regards to today's session, please put them up now, and I'll go through them now while the Sheikh's summarizing, and I'll ask them right at the end, inshallah.
Okay, so just basically as a summary, we looked at some of the juxtaposition of the ayat within the Quran. We spoke about interpretive methodology, how that it actually comes from the Quran itself, which I believe is a feature of the Quran, and you don't find that in other scriptures. Again, we need to confirm that, inshallah.
As far as I know, Sheikh, someone was mentioning it that day that when it comes to interpreting the Bible, the New Testament in particular, they don't have any, if you like, principles as such, which and that's why you have many different interpretations and ways of looking at things, and there's no one clear way of doing it. There's no method.
Yeah, and that's what I would assume, because the Bible itself, when you read it, it doesn't seem like there is anything in there about how to interpret it, just because of the the fact that the text is the way it's put together. Anyhow, so we spoke about that. We spoke about some of those interpretive principles and where they come from in the Quran. Then we started getting into some of the categorization of knowledge, the reality of the human being, which, by the way, we have a whole session on explaining Ayat an-Nur, which gets into a lot of detail about this concept of the ruh and knowledge and all of these, or not knowledge, but the concept of spirituality. Can I end with one thing though?
Yeah, go ahead, Sheikh.
All right. So remember, my thesis at the beginning was that you need, in order to have a clear understanding of truth, one needs to not only have a proper sound rationality, but also has to have what we're going to call a clean fitra, or have spirituality. Okay. And you see this from our source texts. So for instance, in the Quran, when Allah speaks about knowledge, you notice that around that group of ayat, or maybe in the ayah itself, there's always some sort of spiritual act that's mentioned. Okay, so just to give you an example, a very famous ayah, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Say, are those who know equal to those who don't know? Okay, that is part of an ayah. The ayah actually starts before that and says, أَمَّنْ هُوَ قَانِتٌ أَنَاءِ اللَّيْلِ سَاجِدًا وَقَائِمًا يَحْذُرُ الْآخِرِ وَيَرْجُو رَحْمَةَ رَبِّي. And so is the one who is devoutly obedient during the periods of the night, prostrating, standing in prayer, fearing the hereafter, and hoping for the mercy of his Lord. That comes before قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Right? Why? Because the idea is spirituality, right? These are all spiritual acts, is connected with knowledge and having a true understanding of knowledge, right? And so, like, for instance, the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, and I'll end with this, the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa wa razuqna ittiba'. Oh Allah, show me truth as truth and allow me to follow it, right? Wa arina al-batila batila wa razuqna ijtinaba. And show me falsehood as falsehood and allow me to be away from it. That is in the form of a dua, a supplication, which is a spiritual act, right? So spirituality from our tradition is tied intricately with knowledge and the quest for truth.
SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. And that reminded me, that was one of the du'as that Dr. Isar Ahmed used to make before every single one of his lectures and classes. Brilliant. SubhanAllah. I'm just going through there's no... So main questions are, when's the next session, which we're going to discuss and confirm if there's one next Tuesday or it'll be the following Tuesday.
Sure.
And there was something about shaitan being, or Iblis being a jinn, and there's some questions in regards to that, which I think you may touch upon, unless you want to mention something now. Or
we know from, I think it's Surah Al-Kahf, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ, right? That he was from amongst the jinn. So according to the text of the Quran itself, it's clear that he was amongst the jinn. That doesn't mean there isn't a difference of opinion. There is I believe it's a minority opinion which said that he wasn't, but the text of the Quran very clearly says وَكَانَ مِنَ الْجِنِّ, so we take it at its face value that he was indeed a jinn, being amongst the angels. So I should have probably clarified that. My apologies.
So just one question from me as well, Sheikh. We know we've talked about the knowledge of the angels, or you mentioned it briefly. Now, when they're going back to when Allah says he's going to create a creation, which, this new being, and they say, are you going to create a being that causes bloodshed and corruption? And that particular ayah has been, the central theme of many discussions as well amongst the scholars in regards to, okay, how did the angels know? Did they know something extra here? Were they basing it on previous creations? What's your take on that? Because that is a type of, they're expressing a type of, well, if you look at it one way, they're expressing a type of knowledge, aren't they, or a claim? So what's your take on that?
So we'll get into more detail.
Oh man, I think we've lost Sheikh Fahd just as he was about to answer that question. Let's give him a couple of seconds, minute, inshallah, so if he comes back. So brothers and sisters, I know this is a very in-depth series, so may Allah bless you guys for sticking around, and hopefully this has been beneficial. Make sure to share this, and I think Sheikh Fahd is back.
Yeah, so just...
Okay, yeah.
Am I gone again? Okay, no, I'm back.
We can hear you, or we can't see you.
Okay, that's fine. Don't worry about that. All right, so just basically, remember, angels also get information from Allah, okay? And there's a hadith, and inshallah, we'll talk about it next time. Allah speaks about wahi to the angels in the form of speech. So angels have a direct type of knowledge, right? Because wahi goes straight to the heart, right? So, for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قل من كان عدوا لجبريل فإنه نزله على قلبك بإذن الله. Right? So say whoever is an enemy of Jibreel, indeed he is the one who brings the revelation, نزله على قلبك, upon your heart directly. So one of the categories that we needed to get into was the idea of knowledge of the heart, which is that spiritual knowledge that I was going to talk about. But that has a type of angelic reality. So when the angels thought that they were the most knowledgeable is because they were getting knowledge directly from Allah by way of wahi, right? Okay? And that wahi, they're thinking that they're the ones that are privy to that. When what the reality is that Allah has created a human being which will also have prophets that get wahi in the same way, in addition to having empirical knowledge. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. And so now what they don't know is that they have a being that's in fact has the potential to be better than them by way of prophets and the people that follow prophets, and can be more knowledgeable in terms of the worldly kind of scientific, whatever you want to call it, physical sciences as well, right? And so that's kind of where this idea comes from, is that they assumed, not with any sort of malice or doubt or anything like that, but because that's what the limitation of what they had been told was, that, okay, well, now you have this being, it's going to basically cause corruption, bloodshed, or whatever it might be, and we are the most knowledgeable and the most honorable. But they're not the most knowledgeable because the asma, and they're not the most honorable because they were told to prostrate to Adam. Make sense?
Makes sense. One last question and we wrap up on this, Sheikh. I think it's a very good question to end up on. And it can lead to a general sort of advice from yourself as well. Lone Tiger says, in the modern world, how do you find the real truth? There are too many gray areas in the world that can make life confusing, and what to actually believe. What do you do to fight that?
Okay. Oh man, that's, can we hold it off till next session? Because that was really what we wanted to dig into and have an understanding of the spiritual means by which you come to truth, right? Means it's a function of both rationality and spirituality. And so we were going to get into, like, how does that work for someone, let's say, who's not Muslim, right? Is that available to them, right? Those spiritual acts to come. And so we're going to dig into that, because there's a type of wahi, a type of, I don't want to say revelation. We need to get into a definition as well. But there's a type of wahi that people in general get, whether you're Muslim or not Muslim, right? So it's not only ilham, there's dreams and all sorts of other things. Let's save that for next time, inshallah, because we need to get into some detail related to that.
Lone Tiger said that's fine, inshallah. So what I'll do, brothers and sisters, is I will post the next session up on the community section of the page. So keep an eye on that on the YouTube channel. If you want to follow Sheikh Fahd, if you want to just give your, wherever they can catch you and the other stuff.
Sure, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. Let's see, I'm on Facebook as well. I don't really check that much. I guess I can send you some of those links. You can post them if you want. And of course, I'm ever present with Aira in the US, inshallah. So
inshallah, brilliant. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. So we'll catch up with everyone next session, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Take care. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.